This is the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 17. We're looking at the squads of the 2023 Gold Cup. This is the full-length version for Guadeloupe's players. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin and this is Series 17 on the players of the 2023 Gold Cup. And this episode covers Guadeloupe's players. It is, in fact, our last episode in this series. So I'll have to think of something clever to say at the end. And I will have a little message at the end on our upcoming series. But just a couple of notes here before we begin. This media cast is in two parts. So the first is an overview of the candidates for the squad and our guess as to their likelihood of making it. For most of the teams, we did this in May. But for the three teams who made it through the playoffs, of course, we didn't know which teams were going to make it. So we did it just after we knew which teams there were. And the preliminary and final rosters were published by that time, but we didn't look at them because we wanted to not know that information when we did part one here. So in part two, we take a look at the list that we compiled in part one, and we go through the players who did make the preliminary and final squad. And that'll let you know which candidates made the team and also how accurate we were in predicting them. Okay, so we're organizing this by position, and we realize that this is not always accurate as players do change position. There's always a few surprises, and in fact for Guadeloupe, there's more than a couple of surprises, an interesting kind of development which we'll see on the way as we go through. But to give you a hint, it's pretty similar with what happened with Martinique. And just to entice you a little bit, that development, we believe, makes them much more competitive for this cup than we thought they were going to be. All right, well, that's that. Let's begin. And I'm going to kind of give it away right away here. We have been starting some of the podcasts for some teams to look at their formations, which we decided wasn't very useful. For some teams, if it's relevant, we looked at their recent games. So for Martinique, it was very relevant because they had a few games which I called recruiting games, where they seemed to go out of their way to bring players in, mostly from France, but maybe a few of their own local players, and try them out for the team. And Guadeloupe didn't do it as formally as Martinique did, but there were a couple of games, and I'll just cover them by saying in March 2022, they had games. One was an unlikely opponent in Cape Verde, that's in Africa, and the other was against Martinique, and they did kind of scrape the citizenship records of France, it seems, to find players who had some valid connection with Guadeloupe. So we see an introduction of several French players there. And kind of the same thing in 2023, we see a bunch of players coming in for the March games and even for the Gold Cup playoff games. And in fact, replacing some of the players who played in the 2021 Gold Cup. So you'll see as we go through this kind of pattern. All right, well, without delay, let's begin on the candidates. And we begin with the current manager, Jocelyn Angloma. Jocelyn Angloma has been manager of Guadeloupe since 2017. The only Gold Cup, though, was the 2021 Gold Cup. And he himself is arguably the most famous Guadeloupe player. You could argue Thierry Henry, who has connections to Guadeloupe. His father was born there. Could take that. But Jocelyn Angloma was born in Guadeloupe, and he played for them in 2006 and 2007. He also played for France in 1990 to 96, and is very successful. He played for Valencia in Spain and Inter Milan in Italy, and Paris Saint-Germain in France, so some of the biggest teams there. He participated in the Euro 1992 and 1996 for France, and then in the Gold Cup in 2007 for Guadeloupe, where they got their best result, reaching the semi-finals. So a manager of great renown there, Jocelyn Angloma, and he will take them through this Gold Cup also. Let's take a look at goalkeepers, and we have two likely candidates in Davy Rouillard and in Bryce Cognard. So Davy Rouillard first. He has been with the team since 2022 and is 23 years old, and he has 5 caps, and he currently plays for Bordeaux in France. And he was with the Bordeaux Youth Club in France. So he was actually born in Guadeloupe, unlike a lot of the players who we'll look at who were actually born in France and just have a connection to Guadeloupe. He hadn't actually played any games with the senior team of Bordeaux, by the way. He plays for the Bordeaux B team, really. And he got his first cap in June 2022 and started 5 of their remaining 8 games prior to the Cup and was on the bench for 3 others. So, yes, one of the, we could put him among the recruits, although he was born in Guadeloupe. But it looks like a likely candidate there. I would almost say definite. Given that he hasn't missed a game since his first in June 2022. But we'll leave him as likely for now. The other likely candidate is Bryce Cognard, and he has been with the team also since June of 2022, but 3 caps for him, and he is quite a bit older at 33 years old, and he plays for Avranches in France with their kind of between the A and B team there, and he was born in France, and he got his first appearance on the bench in June 2022 and started 3 of their remaining 8 games prior to the Cup and was on the bench for 5 others. So given that, I think I will move Davy Rouillard up to the definite just to kind of show that he's a little bit ahead of Bryce Cognard in the likelihood. And we move on to our third candidate, the possible level, and it's Willy Leguer. And Willy Leguer does not have any caps for the team. He's 26 years old, and he plays in Guadeloupe for Petit Canal in Guadeloupe. And he was on the preliminary squad for the 2021 Gold Cup, but he didn't make the final cut there. So he actually got his first appearance on the bench in March 2022. He was named to that Gold Cup's preliminary squad without ever having been on the bench for them. So his first appearance in March 2022 and started none of their remaining 10 games. However, he was on the bench for all 10. So we have him as possible, and actually that's reaching up to the likely level, especially since there don't seem any really viable candidates behind those 3. So we do have 2 players who seem to be off the squad. The first one is Johan Thuram, or Johan Thuram Uliem, and he has been with Guadeloupe since 2016, and he's 33 years old. He earned 10 caps for the team. He was born in France, but actually spent most of his childhood in Guadeloupe, but plays his soccer in France. He's currently with Quevilly-Rouen in France since 2022, and was with Amiens and Le Mans before that. And he was actually absent from the team for a 5-year period. I'll get to that. Before that, I just wanted to say he was a starter in the 2021 Gold Cup. That's really why he's on the list here. He was replaced in Game 3 by Kevin Ajax, who we'll introduce next, but the starter in the 2021 Gold Cup. And actually, before that Gold Cup, as I started to say, he was absent for 5 years. until he came back. And since the beginning of 2022, he started the first 2 of their 10 games. And then he was not selected for the last 8 matches prior to the Cup. So we're going to see this pattern quite a bit, kind of out with the old and in with the new. And that seems to be the case for Thuram Ulian. And also for Kevin Ajax, who was the backup keeper in the 2021 Gold Cup. He seems to be off the team too. And he was with Guadeloupe since 2017, and he's 32 years old with nine caps. And he played in Guadeloupe. He plays for Moulin in Guadeloupe since 2015 with the same team there. And as I said, a backup in the Gold Cup in 2021, but he did replace Thuram for game 3 there. And his last appearance for the national team was in March 2022. So you can see the pattern pretty clearly. Those 2 keepers who played the Gold Cup in 2022 being replaced by 3 keepers who came onto the team in mid-2022. And that's a pattern we're gonna see throughout. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of goalkeepers, and we move on to defenders. So in central defense, we have 2 definite candidates. The first is Anthony Barron, and Anthony Barron has played for Guadeloupe since 2018, and he's 27. Sorry, I'm getting some of the ages wrong here. He is, so I'll just actually review because I was looking at the wrong page there. Going back to goalies, Davy Rouillard is 23, Bryce Cognard is 33, Willie Laguerre is 26, Andrew, and I was right about Thuram and Ajax. Thuram 31 years old and Ajax 32 years old. So they are kind of getting old as well, although that's not that old for a goalkeeper. Okay, sorry about all that. Getting back to Anthony Barron, he is 30 years old and he has 20 caps for the national team and 1 goal as a central defender. And he plays for Servette in Switzerland and was with Yverdon Sport in Switzerland before that. He was born in France and he was part of the Gold Cup there, started and finished all 3 games. And since the beginning of 2022, he started 9 of their 10 games and was on the bench for the others. So Anthony Barron seems a definite candidate here, and it would be surprising if he wasn't named to the squad. That may be true of Andrew Gravillon as well. Andrew Gravillon has been with the team, though, just since 2022, so one of the new players there. But not that new, as you'll see soon. He's 25 years old with 8 caps and 1 goal and plays for Stade Reims in France, although he was loaned to Torino in Italy since 2023. And he actually played for Inter Milan, not just once, but 2 different spells with them. Inter Milan from 2019 to 2022, although he didn't play any games with Inter Milan's senior team there. And as I said, not as new as all that, because he was on the preliminary squad for the 2021 Gold Cup, kind of named to the squad without ever having appeared for the team, even on the bench before, but not making the final cut there. But he did play his first game for Guadeloupe in June 2022 and started 6 of their 8 remaining games prior to the Cup, subbed in for 2 games besides. So always called up since June 2022. So we have Andrew Gravillon as a definite candidate. We also have, they're so rich in this part of the field, we have several likely candidates, but you'll see perhaps why a bit later. I'll tell you why, because they're thin in the midfield. So I think some of these players, some of these central defenders maybe play out of position, like defensive midfielders or even central midfielders. Anyway, the first one is Cedric Avinel. So Cedric Avinel has been with Guadeloupe since 2016. So quite a few veterans we're looking at here, but that'll change. And he is 36 years old, so really getting to the end of his career there, and has been with Ajaccio in France since 2017. And he was born in France, and he was part of the Gold Cup 2009 squad. And he returned after a 7-year absence in March 2023 to start 3 of their remaining 4 games, and was on the bench for the others. So really making a comeback onto the team, the 36-year-old. And given his recent participation, we think he's a likely candidate. Another veteran of the team, Ronan Hauteville, has been with Guadeloupe since 2017. And he has 17 caps and 2 goals. And he is also quite up there in age, 34 years old. And he plays in Guadeloupe for Petit Canal, one of the bigger teams in Guadeloupe there, since 2018. And he was part of the Gold Cup squad, but only a substitute in the 2021 Gold Cup, appearing only in game 3 there. And since then, he started 2 of their 10 games since the start of 2022, but he was on the bench for 8 of the games. So Ronan Hauteville, and I made a mistake on his age, he's 33 years old, not 34, but we consider him a likely candidate. So those are the kind of the seniors on the squad. But there's one more in Medellina. Medellina has been with Guadeloupe all the way since 2008, and he's 36 years old too, with 13 caps in that time. He currently plays for one of the other big clubs, Solidarité Scolaire in Guadeloupe, Solidarité Scolaire. And he's been with them since 2022. He was actually without a club from February to December 2021, but prior to that played in France for Boulogne and Béziers, not very big clubs there. And yes, part of the Gold Cup 2009 squad, just like Cedric Avinel. And he was only a substitute, though, in that tournament. And he returned himself after a long absence of 7.5 years. Returning in March 2022, and started 6 of their remaining 10 games prior to the Cup, prior to this Cup here, and was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1, so just not selected for one of those matches. So it looks like all of these 3 players are fairly entrenched in the team, and we think they're likely to make the squad despite their age. And we have another one in we have 2 more, actually. One of them is Nathaniel Santini. So Nathaniel Santini is a lot younger, 23 years old, and has been with the team since 2022 with 8 caps. And he plays for Sion in Switzerland, kind of between their A and B teams there. But interestingly, he was loaned to a club called Titus Petange in Luxembourg in 2020 and 2021. So Santini was born in Guadeloupe, but is kind of like grouped among what we'll call the new recruits. He got his first cap in March 2022 and started 7 of their remaining 10 games prior to the Cup, subbed in for 1 and on the bench for the last 2 matches. So also not missing a game for the team. So as I said, that recruitment did include some players who were from Guadeloupe, and he was one of them. So Nathaniel Santini, the 4th of our likely candidates. And we have one more in Steve Solvet. So Steve Solvet has been with the team since 2021. And he's 27 years old with 7 caps and 2 goals. And he plays for Orléans in France, and has played all of his No, not all of his career. Since 2013, he moved to France from Guadeloupe. He was playing in Guadeloupe for in 2011 to 13, and was born in Guadeloupe too. He was part of the Gold Cup 2021 squad also, starting games 1 and 3 there. He actually got a red card in that game. He punched someone like a boxer in the solar plexus and took a red card for it 54 minutes into game 1. That's why he was suspended for game 2, but he returned for game 3. And since that time, he was off the squad for almost 2 years until he returned in June 2023 to start both of their remaining games prior to the Cup. And even though he's a central defender, he did score one of their goals in the win, the Gold Cup playoff win over Antigua and Barbuda. So perhaps we're being a bit generous here, just returning the 2 games, putting him at the likely level. So we'll put him at the possible level, but starting the 2 Gold Cup playoff games is pretty positive. It's just that there are so many candidates here that I think possible is a better assessment. Okay, and then one, believe me, not all of the positions have this many players. Central defense has a ton of players, but we'll see the midfield is a bit thin. We have a possible but unlikely candidate in Stevenson Casimir, and he has been with Guadeloupe since 2009 and is 31 years old. And he has 4 caps, just 4 caps for the national team. He does play in Guadeloupe for La Gauloise, and he's been with that team since 2017, so quite a long time. And he was a starter in the 2021 Gold Cup. For games 1 and 2, at least. He wasn't even on the bench for game 3 there. And he has since started none of their 10 games since the beginning of 2022, but he was on the bench for the first 2 and then not selected for the last 8 matches. So that puts him off the team for well over a year. I think a year and 3 months he has not been called up. So possible there, but unlikely. And then a player who seems to be off the squad in Nicholas St. Ruff, and he kind of came and went quickly. He was with the team since 2022, actually the same number of caps as Casimir Stephen, but and he's 31 years old. He's actually a teammate of Steve Solvet at Orléans in France, and he played for Nancy in France before that, but with Orléans since 2019, and born in France. He got his first cap for Guadeloupe in March 2022, and then he started 4 games, and then he was not called up for the last 4 matches, not called up for 6 matches in all, but significantly the last 4 matches. And actually, Guadeloupe only played 4 matches after June 2022. That was their Nations League matches in March 2023, and then the playoff matches here. So that would mean he's been off the team for a year, and that's why we're categorizing players who have missed the last 4 games as seemingly off the team. All right, well, that finally brings us to the end of central defenders, and we move on to left backs, where there are fewer candidates. We begin with a possible candidate in Jérôme Roussillon. Jérôme Roussillon is brand new to Guadeloupe, actually, since 2023, even though he's 30 years old, and he just has 3 caps. He plays for Union Berlin in Germany, and actually has a fairly good record with clubs with Wolfsburg in Germany and Montpellier in France from 2015 to 18. So with Guadeloupe, he got his first cap in March of 2023, so part of that recruitment drive, and he started 1 of their 4 remaining games prior to the Cup, and he was subbed in for the other match there in March, but not called up for either of the Gold Cup playoff games in June. So we have Jérôme Roussillon as a possible candidate for left back. We have then three players who seem to be off the team, and I'll try to go quickly here. Kelly Irap actually made a good impression on me in the 2021 Gold Cup. Perhaps I'm wrong in that impression, because he did get a red card 29 minutes into game 3, but otherwise he was a starter during the Cup, but he hasn't played for them since that Gold Cup, so not really a consideration for this squad, having last played in 2021. He's only 28 years old, by the way, so he should be, should be still in the picture. But it seems players in the Gold Cup are being replaced by new recruits. The second player that seems to be off the team is Jean-Pierre Morgan. So Jean-Pierre Morgan has been with the team just since 2022, and he's also 31 years, or not also, he's 31 years old, and he got his first cap in March 2022. Started the first 6 of their remaining games prior to the Cup, but then he was not selected for the last 4 matches. Again, that would mean not selected for the last year. So perhaps a bit harsh, but we have them as seemingly off the squad. And so too is Thomas Pinot. Thomas Pinot has been with Guadeloupe since 2021, and he has 6 caps, and he plays for Solidarité Scolaire in Guadeloupe. So played with a youth club in Guadeloupe, and then actually moved to a youth club in France. But I shouldn't give too many details, because he's apparently off the squad. Was a substitute in the 2021 Gold Cup, but appeared only in game 3, where he came in at halftime, and didn't start any of their games since the start of 2022, but he was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 3 before being one of several players here who basically have gone missing since June 2022, not playing for the last year. So Thomas Pinot seemingly off the squad. We move on to right backs, where we have 2 likely candidates. The first is Michael Alphonse. And Michael Alphonse has been with Guadeloupe since 2018, and he has 14 caps and no goals, and he's 33 years old. He's actually the captain of the team, and he plays for Ajaccio in France since 2022, and he actually was with Maccabi Haifa in Israel before that. So Michael Alphonse was born in France. He was part of the 2021 Gold Cup squad, starting and finishing games 1 and 2, but another one who was not on the bench for game 3. So I'm not sure what happened there. Might have something to do with COVID, actually. And he was off the team for a little while, actually. He returned after a 20-month absence, so that's a little more than a year and a half, in March of 2023, and then started all 4 of their remaining games prior to the Cup. So I'm not sure when he was made captain, but he is the captain. So perhaps is more likely than likely, but we'll leave him at the likely level here, because he did return from an absence. The next one is the likely candidate, Dimitri Caver. And Dimitri Caver has been with the team since 2018, and he has 8 caps and no goals. And he is 28 years old and plays for Sion in Switzerland. He also played for Barnsley in England from 2017 to 2020 before moving over to Sion there. And he was on the roster for the 2021 Gold Cup, but actually not on the bench for any of the 3 games. So again, COVID may have played a part, or for whatever reason, he was on the roster but not on the bench. And since the beginning of 2022, he subbed in, or he started 3 games, subbed in for 1, and was twice out with injury for 6 matches, including the last 2 matches. And he is currently listed as injured. He had been out from his soccer club with 3 separate injuries, all of them listed as unknown, and that was since the start of 2022. But the last injury was, I think that was the longest one. It was from mid-May. And the return date on that is also unknown. So we'll try to update you in the part 2 of the media cast here, but it looks like he's going to be out for the cup, so we'll put him on the injured list as well here. Okay, that brings us to the end of defenders. That was quite a busy section with a lot of candidates, but now we look at midfielders, and not so much as Guatemala and Martinique, but they are thin on midfielders. Those other two teams were very thin, so it seems to be a bit of a pattern in the region here. So we'll begin anyway with defensive midfielders, and in a strange similarity to Guatemala and Martinique, they're fine in defensive midfielders, but just thin in the rest of midfield, including attacking midfielders. But let's get on with it, and we'll introduce Quinton Annette as a likely candidate in defensive midfield. He has been with Guadeloupe since 2019, has Annette, and he has 15 caps and no goals, and he is 25 years old. He plays in Martinique for Club Franciscain, and he was part of the Gold Cup in 2021, subbing into game 1 there and then gaining a starting position for the following 2 games. Since the beginning of 2022, he started 4 of their 10 games, and he subbed in for 2 and was on the bench for 2. So just 2 matches that he wasn't selected for. And that's why we have Quinton Annette as a likely candidate. At the possible level, we have Jordan Leborn. Jordan Leborn has been with Guadeloupe since just 2022. He is 27 years old. Just 4 caps for him, and he plays for Versailles in France, and played for Rodez in France before that. Don't let the 4 caps turn you off. It seems like Guadeloupe doesn't play a lot of games, so even some of their veteran players or consistent starters don't have a very impressive number of caps. Anyway, Jordan Leborn got his first cap in March 2022. He started 4 games, including the last 2 matches those Gold Cup playoff matches. But in the middle there, he was not selected for 6 matches. So at least he's come back in recent times. So we have Jordan Leborn as a possible candidate. The other 2 candidates are seemingly off the squad. Again, it's those players who kind of went AWOL in June or even March of 2022. The first one is Morgan St. Maximin. So he's been with Guadeloupe since 2021 and has 11 caps. Has 11 caps for the team and no goals. And he's 25 years old, and he plays for Solidarité Scolaire in Guadeloupe, Scolaire. I gave kind of an Italian pronunciation, I think, there. He was a starter in the 2021 Gold Cup, was Morgan St. Maximin. And he started 2 of their 10 games since the start of 2022 and subbed in for 3 and was on the bench for 1, but not selected for the last 4 matches since June 2022. And in the case of St. Maximin, he was not even listed for the 4 matches. Now, I'm trying to figure out what that means on the website. What it sometimes means is that they have retired or quit the team. Sometimes, though, I've seen that it doesn't really mean that much. But I do imagine that some of these players are upset at being replaced, having been starters in the 2021 Gold Cup. Now they're being replaced by these recruits from France. So I wonder if some of them have maybe quit the team because they're upset about that. But I don't know. And all I can say is that he's seemingly off the squad because he last appeared in June 2022. And the same is true for Kevin Malpon, or sometimes called Edwin Malpon. And he actually played in the Gold Cup in 2021 and hasn't appeared since then. So been off the team a little bit longer. He was a starter in the 2021 Gold Cup. So I think the same thing kind of applies, that he's being replaced or he is being replaced by newer recruits. So Kevin Malpong, he's just actually 27 years old. So again, he's not off the team because of age or anything. So I suspect it's being replaced by younger and possibly better players. Okay, we move on to central midfield, and we actually only have one player, one candidate in that position, incredibly, because a lot of teams have 6 to 8 midfielders to choose from. It's a popular position. Here we just have Johan Rootsen, and he's been with the team since 2022, and he is 26 years old and with 7 caps and no goals. And he plays Sassetti in France since 2022 and has been with French teams Quevilly Rouen in France and also with their B team since 2019 to 2022. So he got his first cap in June of 2022 and started 4 of their 8 remaining games prior to the cup, and he was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 1 other. So regularly called up, at least since June 2022, and one of the players that is replacing these veterans. Central midfielder Johan Rootsen. And given the lack of central midfielders, that's why we think some of the central defenders are probably playing in that position. Left midfielders, we have no one coded as a left midfielder. So we move on to right midfielders. And there we had Dimitri Ramoth as a likely candidate. And Dimitri Ramoth has been with Guadeloupe since 2019, and he has 11 caps and 4 goals, so a pretty decent scoring record there for the 32-year-old. He is with Amical in Guadeloupe, been with that team since 2016, and was part of the 2021 Gold Cup as a substitute. In game 1, at least, he went on to start game 2. As well. Since the start of 2022, he hasn't started any games, but he was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 6 others. So he looks like a very steady substitute and always called up kind of for that role. So Dimitri Ramoth, a possible candidate here. And we have a player who seems to be off the squad in Olivier Serein. Olivier Serein has been with Guadeloupe since 2022, and he has 1 cap and is 28 years old and plays for Le Gossier in Guadeloupe. He got his first appearance in March 2022 and didn't start any games after that, but was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 4, and then not selected for the last 4 matches. So another of those players who have been AWOL since June 2022, and we've been coding them as seemingly off the squad. We move on to left wingers, where we have 2 candidates. One of them is a definite. It's Ange Freddy Plumain. Ange Freddy Plumain has been with Guadeloupe since 2022 and is 28 years old, so joining the team late there. He's earned 7 caps so far with no goals, and he's been playing for teams in Israel since 2022, and prior to that was playing in the Ukraine in 2022. He was in Lviv with Ruk Lviv was the team, and I wonder if because of the war there he was loaned out first of all to Hapoel Tel Aviv in Israel, and since then a couple of other players. And he's a real globetrotter. He was with Samsunspor in Turkey and in Fulham in England from 2013 to 16. Didn't actually play any games for Fulham, but a real globetrotter. And he got his first cap in June 2022 for Guadeloupe and started 5 of their remaining 8 games prior to the Cup, as well as being subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1 other. So consistently called up since his start in June 2022. One of the players again replacing the old guard, and Ange Freddy Ploumain, a definite candidate here. And we have a possible candidate in Gregory Gendry. So Gregory Gendry has been with Guadeloupe all the way back since 2008. So he's 36 years old, like a couple of those central defenders that we saw. And he has 31 caps and 9 goals. And he plays in Guadeloupe for Solidarité Scolaire. But he did play in France for a long time before that with various clubs. And even was in Bulgaria for a short time. So he too was part of the 2019 Gold Cup as a substitute, and also part of the 2011 Gold Cup. And recently he returned after a more than 3.5-year absence in June 2022 and started 3 of their remaining 6 games prior to the Cup, as well as subbing in for 3. However, he was not selected for the last 2 matches. Those were the Gold Cup playoff games. So that kind of brings him down a rung there. And we consider Gregory Gendry just a possible candidate here. We have no players coded as right wingers, but we do have one player coded as a general midfielder. That means we're not really sure, or the website that I use is not really sure what position in the midfield that he plays in. The player is Livio Damas Agis. That is quite a name. Livio Damas Agis. And we have him at the seemingly off the squad level. He also plays for Solidarité Scolaire in Guadeloupe, and has played all of his soccer in Guadeloupe. And he was actually selected for the preliminary squad for the 2021 Gold Cup, but didn't make the final cut. And he's only has 1 cap for the team in 2022, actually, and that was in March 2022. He earned that cap, just subbed in for 1 minute, and has not appeared since then. So kind of came and went quite quickly. I do think he might have was on the bench for a couple of games in 2021, but a short-lived time with Guadeloupe. But he's young enough that he could come back because he's only 23 years old. Okay, and we move on to forwards. We begin with the attacking midfielders, and we saw that, well, defensive midfielders, they had plenty of candidates, but moving forward for central right and left midfielders, right and left wingers, they were very thin, and they remained thin at the attacking midfield level with only 1 candidate. And that is the possible candidate Bakish Tili. Bakish Tili, where am I here? Bakish Tili has been, oh, sorry, I'm pronouncing that wrong. Vikash Tili, and I might be pronouncing that wrong too. But anyway, Vikash Tili has been with Guadeloupe since 2019, and he has 14 caps, but just 1 goal. And he's 25 years old, and he plays in Guadeloupe for Le Moule in Guadeloupe. And he was part of the Gold Cup squad, subbing into games 1 and 2 there and starting game 3. And he started 1 of their 10 games since the beginning of 2022, as well as subbing in for 4 and being on the bench for 4. And there was 1 match that he wasn't selected for. So actually missing just 1, I'm tempted to move him up to the to the likely level, but maybe I'll keep him where he is because he was just a sub in the 2021 Gold Cup. Okay, let's finish. We don't have any players coded as secondary strikers, so let's finish with forwards. And there we have two definite candidates, and the first is Matthias Phaeton. Matthias Phaeton has been with Guadeloupe just since 2021, but he has 16 caps and 6 goals, so a pretty good scoring record. There, and he's very young at 23 years old, and has recently moved to CSKA Sofia in Bulgaria, having been with Grenoble Foot in France and Guingamp prior to that. So other clubs have all been in France where he was born. And he was part of the Gold Cup actually in 2021, started and finished all 3 games. And he's since started 7 of their 10 games since the beginning of 2022 and was subbed in for the 3 others. So we have Matthias Phaeton as a definite candidate. And along with him, we have Thierry Ambrose. So Thierry Ambrose has been with the team since 2022. He has a good scoring record too, 8 caps and 4 goals. And he plays for Oostende in Belgium since 2021. He was with Metz before that, but probably best known for being with Manchester City in England from 2015 to 20. He didn't actually play any games for the senior club there with Man City. Rather, he was loaned out, but loaned out to some pretty good clubs like Metz and Lens in France, where he was born. He was also at Man City's youth club as well. And he came to the team, so he's one of the players coming in, obviously a good quality player, so it's no surprise that they are replacing the old guards with these players who do seem to have better club affiliations. He got his first cap in March 2022, started 8 of the remaining 10 games, and then subbed in for the 2 others. So, you know, as soon as he became available to Guadeloupe, he was on the squad. I don't know if I mentioned he's 26 years old. So, you know, a lot of these players try out for, they have ambitions of making the French team. In his case, he played for the France under 16 to under 19 teams, and you know, maybe had hopes of getting on to France, and then at 26 years old realized he was far from reaching the French squad, so took up with Guadeloupe. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the story for several of these French players who are just coming in. Anyway, we also have 4 possible candidates for forward. So we begin with Luther Archimede. Luther Archimede has been with Guadeloupe since 2019, and he's 23 years old, and he's one of the few players who actually plays in the USA. So he's with Sacramento Republic in the United States, and with New York Red Bulls B team prior to that. And he actually went to university in the USA with the Syracuse University team in 2019 and 20. He was part of the Gold Cup in 2021, was Luther Archimede, and he was subbed into game 1, and then he started game 2, but just 15 minutes into that game he suffered an injury which ended his tournament. And he was off the team for a while after that, a 20-month absence, so almost 2 years, returning just recently in March 2023 to start one of their remaining 4 games prior to the Cup. And he was subbed in for the other 3. So it looks like he made his way back onto the team. And we have Luther Archimede as a possible candidate here. Also possible is Stephen Davidas. Stephen Davidas has been with Guadeloupe for a long time, since 2012, but only 4 caps in that time for the 31-year-old. And he plays for La Gauloise in Guadeloupe, but he has played in France for for 5 years. And actually, incredibly, he resumed play for the national team in 2023 after an 11-year absence. I mean, that's almost a whole soccer career. He played his first 2 games in the spring of 2012 and then was off the team, and then returned after those 11 years in June 2023 and subbed into both of their remaining 2 prior games, 2 games prior to the Cup. And these were the Gold Cup qualification matches, and he scored in one of those as well. So that probably helped his chances. But Stephen Davidas, 31 years old, but working his way back onto the team here, it seems. We have him as a possible candidate. The next one is Jeffrey Durband. So Jeffrey Durband has been with the team since 2019 with Guadeloupe, and he's 31 years old. So a real latecomer to the team there. 33 caps. Sorry, what am I talking about? 3 caps and 2 goals. So he was with Stade Laval in France from 2021 to 23, but he's currently not under contract. So maybe hoping to get some exposure through this tournament. He was born in France, and actually he got his 2 goals in his debut match. That was a 10-0 win over Turks and Caicos Islands. So he kind of filled his boots there. He was he actually scored goals in the 2021 Gold Cup qualifying, but he wasn't selected even for the preliminary squad there, Jeffrey Durband. But he actually got his first cap in 2019 and returned after a 3.5-year absence just recently in March of 2023, and started one of their remaining 2 games before the Cup and was subbed in for the other. So another player who kind of came back just for those Gold Cup playoff matches, and we have to put him as a possible candidate, having been called up so recently. Our final possible candidate is Jordan Tell, and he's brand new to the team since 2023, but he has got 3 caps and 1 goal. So 28 years old and with Grenoble foot in France. He got his first appearance also recently on the bench in March 2023 and started 2 of their remaining 4 games prior to the Cup. So subbed in for 1 and, as mentioned, on the bench for the first one. So Jordan Tell, also a possible candidate here. And all of those kind of candidates, some of them new to the squad, look like they'll be replacing some of the old guard here, Sylvain Mervel, or sometimes called Raphael Mervel, who was with Guadeloupe from 2018. Although he last appeared in the Gold Cup, so doesn't really seem to be a consideration for the squad, despite a great scoring record of 15 caps and 9 goals, and despite being only 27 years old. He's currently unattached. He was playing for a very small club in Italy, having moved there from Guadeloupe in 2022. That's not his first Italian club there. But Merval was a starter in the Gold Cup there, and started at least games 1 and 3. And he scored 8 of their 23 goals in qualifying for that Gold Cup. But he last appeared in the Gold Cup and has not been called up since. So that is a shame. Sylvain Merval apparently off the team. So too, Florian David. So Florian David, well, I'll just make this brief. He was off the team for 2.5 years, returning in March 2022. So he got his first cap in 2018. Returned in March 22 and subbed in for 1 game and then hasn't been heard from since then. So Florian David, a very outside chance, even less so than a lot of those players who played their last game in June 2022. I wonder if I should have put those as possible, but unlikely, since there were only 4 games since that time. But anyway, we will come back in part 2 and see if any of those made the team, or how many of the new recruits have been selected over them. So we'll see you then for part 2. We're back, and we have looked at the preliminary squad and the final squad for Guadeloupe. And we are now prepared to go through the list that we made in part 1. In part 1, we listed the players. I'm saying this on behalf of the people just joining us for the short version of the podcast. In part 1, we made a list of players, basically players who had played for the squad recently, and we categorized them according to how likely they were to make the team. And if you want that information, you can go back. It basically gives some biographical information on the players and tells why we are assessing them the way we're assessing them. I'll give maybe one example as we go through here. And let's get on with it. So let's see who made the team. So we begin with the manager, Jocelyn Angloma. And no changes there. He did make the team. Okay, and then on to goalkeepers. So as an example, and we did notice a pattern in part 1 of basically new players recruited from France, some of them from Guadeloupe, new players in Guadeloupe, basically replacing the old guard. Many of the players from the 2021 Gold Cup, and there's no better example of it than the goalkeepers here. So I'll just give an example. We had a definite candidate in Davy Rouard, and he just joined the team in 2022, but he got his first cap in June 2022, started 5 of their remaining 8 games, and was on the bench for the 3 others. So he looks like he is in. Actually, he's not a great example, because he's not one of the players born in France, recruited in France. He was born in Guadeloupe, but hopefully you get the picture. The other one, Bryce Cognard, actually was recruited from France. He's 33 years old, and just joined Guadeloupe in 2022, and similarly has come into the picture fully. And the other candidate at the possible level, Willie Laguerre, all 3 of those players making it to the final squad, and at the expense, as it were, to Johan Lillian-Thuram, who was the starting keeper in the 2021 Gold Cup, and who started the first 2 games after the Gold Cup in 2022, and then has not been selected or listed even since then. And the same is true for Kevin Ajax, who last played for the national team in March 2022. So more than a year ago, although he was a backup keeper in the Gold Cup. So both of those goalkeepers replaced, it seems, by new players, some of them recruited from France. Kevin Ajax, by the way, did make the preliminary squad at least, but Johan Thuram did not. So I won't harp on about that pattern. You'll kind of see it if you watch part 1 of the media cast, but that pattern kind of goes all the way through here. All right, let's do the business we're supposed to do in part 2, and we move on to central defenders. So we had a whole bunch of them. We had 2 definite candidates. So Anthony Baron did make the final squad, and Andrew Gravillon also made the final squad. We had 4 likely candidates, and all of them made the squad. So Cedric Abignel, Ronan Hauteville, Mehdi Lina, and Nathaniel Santini, all of them making the squad. And we had 1 possible candidate in Steve Solvet, and he also made the squad. So very rich in central defence. But what we talked about in part one was probably some of these players are playing in the midfield, which is a bit thin, because a lot of these players are starting games, so they can't all be starting in central defence. Our possible but unlikely candidate, Stevenson Casimir, did make the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. But the player who seemed to be off the team, Nicholas St. Ruff, does prove to be off the team, at least here, and he was not selected even for the preliminary squad. Okay, moving on to left backs, we had a candidate just at the possible level, and that was Jerome Roussillon. And Jerome Roussillon only made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. And then we had three players seemingly off the squad. Kelly Irab actually hadn't shown up for the team since the 2021 Gold Cup and is not selected even for the preliminary squad here. And nor is Morgan Jean-Pierre. However, Thomas Pino, who we had as seemingly off the squad, is not quite off the squad because he made the preliminary squad, although he didn't make the final cut. Okay, moving over to right backs, we had two likely candidates, and the first was Mikhail Alphonse, and he did make the squad. The other one, Dimitri Caver, apparently was named to the preliminary squad, maybe in hopes that he would recover from his injury. But we knew in part one that he was injured, and it seems like that prevents his participation here because he's on the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. So we'll review that at the end too when we summarize the information. And meanwhile, we'll move on to the midfield and defensive midfielders. So we begin with a likely candidate in Quentin Annette, and he did make the final squad. And so did the possible candidate, Jordan Leborn, making the squad for the Gold Cup in 2023 here. We had two players who were seemingly off the squad, but actually one of them, Morgan St. Maximin, did make the preliminary squad, but not the final squad, while Kevin Malpon, sometimes known as Edwin Malpon, did not even make the preliminary squad there. In the central midfielder, surprisingly, we only had one candidate, but he was at the likely level. That's Johan Rotzen. And Johan Rotzen is on the squad for the Gold Cup. He made it. We had no left midfielders. As you can see, the midfield very thin here. And for right midfielders, we had one likely candidate, Dimitri Ramoth, and he did make the Gold Cup squad. And the player who seemed to be off the squad, Olivier Serrain, not selected even for the preliminary squad. So he does seem to be off the squad. Left winger, we had a definite candidate, Ange Freddy Plumet, and he is one of the kind of the recruits coming in, and he made the squad. However, veteran Gregory Gendry did not make the squad, just the preliminary squad for the 36-year-old Gendry. For right wingers, we had no candidates, but we finished the midfield with a general midfielder, Livio Damas Agis, who seemed to be off the squad, and that proves to be the case, as he was not selected even for the preliminary squad. In the forwards, we begin with attacking midfielders, and there we only had one candidate too, so a bit weak all through the midfield, except defensive midfielders. And Vikash Thiel was a possible candidate, but did make the Gold Cup squad. We had no players coded as secondary strikers, but we had quite a few forwards on the list here. And the two definite candidates, Matthias Phaeton and Thierry Ambrose, both made the final squad. And then among the 4 possible candidates we had, all of them made it. So Luther Archimedes, Stephen Devadas, Jeffrey Durbon, and Jordan Tell. All 4 of those forwards making it. I'm sure they'll also fill in the midfield, attacking midfield, and perhaps the winger positions there. And then we had, again, this pattern of the new players replacing the old ones. We had the Sylvain Mervale, who was a starter in the 2021 Gold Cup, not selected even for the preliminary squad here, and nor was Florian David. So both of those players are indeed off the squad. And that's it. We're going to finish here with just some summaries. So we begin with notable non-selections. And there are none. I mean, in general, we would say those players who were kind of firmly on the team up through the 2021 Gold Cup and up through the early games in 2022, but then who suddenly disappeared in March or in June 2022, kind of replaced by newer players or by some recruits from France. Kind of notable non-selections, but they haven't played for a year. So even in our initial list, we had them as seemingly off the squad. Otherwise, everyone who was selected was either a possible, likely, or definite candidate in our first run through the squad in part 1. So no names to add here. And even for surprise inclusions, there really are none. These would be players who we had at the possible but unlikely level, or the seemingly off the squad level, who actually made the final squad. And there are none of those. I'm going to name a couple of players who we had as seemingly off the squad, but they actually made it to the preliminary squad. So they're not off the squad completely. And that is goalkeeper Kevin Ajax, left back Thomas Pinot, and defensive midfielder Morgan St. Mactimin. So all of those players still in the picture to a degree by dint of having been named to the preliminary squad. In terms of new players, we don't have any players showing up for the Gold Cup that were not on our list. In the first place, we did have a few players show up on the preliminary squad. There were 5 players. One of them was on our list, but he hadn't played for the squad since 2018, so we didn't name him in the first part of the thing, of the media cast. And then the other 4 are brand new players who haven't been even on the bench for Guadeloupe, so kind of named to the preliminary squad based on, I don't know, youth teams or what have you, but they'd never been called up before. So we may see some of those players down the road, but they're not really worth naming here because they would just be names. Finally, we look at injuries, and the only category of injuries we have is a player dropped due to injury, and that's a player we talked about, Dimitri Caver. So we did have him as a likely candidate, but he's been kind of injured on and off, out from his club team with 3 separate injuries since the start of 2022. All of those injuries listed as unknown, but the last one is a significant one. That was an injury from mid-May, also listed as an unknown injury, but the return date also was unknown. And because we did part 1 a bit closer to the Cup than we did for the other teams who qualified much earlier, not through the playoffs, we were pretty doubtful that he was going to be here for this Cup. So Dimitri Caver misses this Cup, and we'll have to see down the road if he makes it to the next one. And that brings us to the end of this media cast, and indeed to the end of the series. I hope you join us for our next series. We're going to do previews for the 2023 Asian Cup and the 2023 African Cup. Both of those are actually in January of 2024. But watch out for our media cast beginning in the late fall or early winter in 2023. We've actually done a preview of the 2023 African Cup qualifying, which is still ongoing. The last games there will be in September, but we're talking about the finals in 2024 that will be coming out in late fall or early winter. And we're also contemplating a series on early qualifying for the 2026 World Cup, which will be starting. A lot of times, some of the preliminary rounds and the weaker teams get ignored there. So if there's enough material for us to do a podcast on the early rounds, we will. Meanwhile, enjoy the rest of the Gold Cup. We hope our preview of the team and the players helps deepen your enjoyment. So it's Canada and US relying on bench strength, and Martinique and Guadeloupe relying on French strength.